Hello everyone, and welcome back to Aliens After Dark. Every night on this channel I share alien and UFO encounter stories, told softly, to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from tonight. Now, get comfortable, let your eyes close if they want to, and let's begin. There is a meter on the front of a refrigerated trailer that counts the hours the thing runs, and mine counted 5 of them while I stood on the shoulder of a road for 41 minutes. My name is Merle Kovarik. I was 44 years old in the fall of 1983, and I had been pulling that kind of load for 19 years by then with no chargeable accident on my record. I say that the way a man says he still has all his fingers. It is not bragging. It is just the shape of the work. That night I had ice cream. Denver up to Sioux Falls, loaded out in the afternoon, and I liked that run because it went through the panhandle, and the panhandle in October is about the best smelling country there is. They were digging beets. The trucks run all day up and down those roads, hauling to the piling stations, and the chaff blows off them and lies in windrows along the shoulder, and the whole county smells like cut beet and diesel. If you grew up out there, that is the smell of somebody's kitchen. She was a good truck. I had the seat cover Arletta made me out of a chenille bedspread, which every driver who ever rode with me made a joke about, and every one of them fell asleep on. I had a peanut butter sandwich and wax paper down in the door pocket. I had a ratchet strap that had worked loose somewhere around Fort Morgan and was ticking against the box, and I had decided at Sterling that I was going to live with it, and I want you to remember that ticking, because it is the last ordinary thing I can put a time on. I need to tell you about the unit first, or the rest of it will not mean anything. The refrigeration unit on the front of the box is its own machine. It has its own engine and its own little fuel tank, and it runs whether the truck is moving or not, because a load of ice cream does not care whether you are parked. Mine was leased. The leasing company billed by the running hour, so there was an hour meter on the side of it, in a window about the size of a matchbook. And I read that meter at every single fuel stop and wrote the number down in my log beside the pump number. I did that because of my brother-in-law, Emil Zabka. Emil lost a truck over sloppy books, which is a thing that sounds impossible until you watch it happen to a man at your own table. And after that, I kept a pencil behind the sun visor and I sharpened it with a pocket knife, and I wrote everything down to the 10th. Fuel to the 10th of a gallon. Hours to the 10th of an hour. I have my logbooks still. All of them. They are in a footlocker. Emil is dead now, and I can say it. He was not lazy. He was the hardest working man I ever sat down to a table with. He just would not write anything down, and when the numbers came due, he did not have them. And a man with no numbers has nothing to hold up in front of himself. I watched my sister's face at Thanksgiving that year. I have written everything down since. At Kimball, I fueled, and I read the meter and I wrote it down. 4,108 and 3/10. 10 minutes past midnight. The girl on the desk had a paperback laid face down by the register and she never looked up, and I remember thinking that was fine by me. Then I ran north and east and got off the 4-lane onto the 2-lane, and that is where the story is. It was the first hard frost of the year. You could see it. It was lying white and even on the fence wire and out across the beet ground, and it had already set on my hood in the 10 minutes I sat at that pump. 2 in the morning. The beet trucks are off the road by then, all of them, and the cafe in the next town shuts at 11, and there is that one dead hour out there where you are the only moving thing for 15 miles in any direction. I knew that for a fact because I had run that road 400 times. The radio went first. I had it on low, the way you do, some station out of Denver that skips a long way at night. And it went to hiss. That happens. What did not happen before was that every other station went to the same hiss. I turned the dial the whole way across, and it was the same sound at every number, and, this is the part I could never get around, it was the same sound in the dead places between the stations. An even hiss with no rise and no fall in it anywhere. I reached back and pulled the antenna lead out of the set, which I could do from the seat, and it was still there, so I shut it off. A while after that, I passed a field where the frost was gone. Not thin, gone. There was a band of bare black ground about the width of the road, starting right at the fence and running away from the highway into the beets, straight, and the tops standing in that band were laid over limp and dark and looked warm. Everything on both sides of it was white. I did not stop. I do not know why I did not stop. I watched it in the mirror until the mirror ran out of it. I have thought about that field more than about any other part of it. It was not a scorch, there was no smell coming off it, and nothing was burnt. It was the way a lawn looks in the morning where a car has been parked all night and then driven off, except that band went back into that field further than my mirror would hold, straight as a fence, and there was not one track going into it. The beets on either side had frost standing on the leaf like sugar. The ones in the band were laid over the way a plant lays over in the heat of the day in July. Then my headlights quit reaching. I want to be careful how I say this because it is the part people take wrong. The lights did not dim, the lights were fine. It was that the lights stopped at a certain distance out in front of me and did not go any further, and I could measure it, because the dashes down the middle of a road like that are a set length and a set space, and I could count them. 11 dashes. Then nothing. And the nothing was not dark. I have driven at night my whole adult life, and I know what dark looks like. Dark has grain in it. There is always something coming up out of it, a post, a weed, the shine off a wire. This had an edge on it, the way a wall has an edge, and there was not one thing on the other side. That was when the unit came on. It started a cool cycle. There was no call for it. That load had been down to temperature since Brighton and the unit had been cycling maybe once an hour like it should. It ran its cycle and shut off, and then, about a minute later, it started another one, and then it started a third, and then it quit cycling and just ran. Continuous. I could hear it through the back wall of the cab over my own engine, which you do not usually hear at all. I know what that unit sounds like starting. Every driver who ever pulled a reefer can do it with his mouth. There is a little catch in it, and then it takes hold. It did that 3 times inside 4 minutes, on a load that did not need it, on the coldest night of that fall so far. I will tell you the other thing I noticed, and it is a small thing. There were no bugs. It was October, sure, but it had not been below freezing but the one night, and there is always something. Moths at the pole, light on an elevator. Something on the glass. I had a clean windshield out of Kimball, and I had a clean windshield an hour later, and there was nothing flying in my beams at all. So I pulled over. That was my own decision, and I've thought about it a great deal since. I put it on the shoulder, set the brakes, and shut the tractor down, because I wanted to hear. The unit kept running. I opened the door, and the frost on the shoulder gravel under my door was gone by the time my boot got down to it. I do not mean it melted while I looked. I mean, I looked down at white gravel. I swung my leg out, and the gravel my boot came down on was dry and black, and the white ran along about a foot away from my toe and stopped. I stood there beside that truck for a bit. I want to say it was 2 or 3 minutes, and then I saw headlights in the mirror, way back. I cannot tell you what that did for me. I got back up in the seat and got the microphone off the hook and said something friendly into it, something like, "Well, there is somebody," and I watched those lights come. They held their distance. I counted 11 minutes on the dash clock and they never got any bigger. And I thought about that for a second, and then I understood what I was looking at. It was 2 lights on a yard pole about a mile behind me on a rise. I had been looking at them the whole time. I laughed at myself out loud in the cab. I said, "That is what that is." I actually said it. It is what a man says. And I sat there a second longer feeling foolish and feeling good about feeling foolish, because a man who is only being foolish is a man who is all right. Then I reached over for my coffee, and my coffee was cold all the way through. The thermos held heat for 8 hours. My wife Arletta bought it for me, and I had it 11 years, and I could pour hot coffee out of it at the end of a shift. It was stone cold, all of it, and there was maybe 2/3 left. I got out again. I do not know what I thought I was going to do out there. I stood with the door open and one boot up on the step and my hand on the grab rail, and I was going to swing up into that seat, and I did not. Because the whole country had gone quiet, I am going to try to say this right. It was not silence, it was not loud, and it was not soft. It was the quiet of a room when you walk in and everybody has stopped talking because you came in. Nobody is doing anything to you. Nobody has moved. It is just that a thing that was going on before you got there is not going on now. And everybody is waiting, politely, for you to be somewhere else. I stood on that step with one boot up and I could not finish the movement. I was not frozen, exactly. I could have. I just did not. And I have never been able to say how long, so I say a while. The strap had stopped ticking. That is a small thing to hang on to, but it is the one I hang on to. It had ticked from Fort Morgan, and it did not tick out there, and it ticked again the next morning outside of Valentine, and I heard it, and I had to pull over for a minute. I was not afraid either, and I have never known what to do with that. I have been afraid in a truck. I know what it is. This was not it. It was more like being the wrong size for the room. Then I was in the seat with the door shut and the key in my hand, and the moon was on the wrong side of the sky. It had been low behind my left shoulder the whole run, the way a late moon is in October, and I'd been watching it in the mirror off and on for an hour. When I sat down in that seat, it was low ahead of me and off to the right. That is what I have got. I am not going to decorate it for you. I started her up, and I drove to Alliance, and I weighed, and I went on. The state man at the scale waved me through without looking up from whatever he had, the way he did every single time. And I remember being obscurely grateful to him for that. I wanted the world to be exactly as bored with me as it had been at midnight. Here is the rest, and this is the part I have never been able to make sit down. My wristwatch said 41 minutes had gone by since I shut down on that shoulder. The clock in the dash said the same. And I do not ask anybody to take my word for either one of those, because there were 2 more clocks in it that were not mine. My fuel ticket out of Kimball is machine stamped. The scale ticket at Alliance is machine stamped. And when you lay those 2 stamps down and take out the running time, which I could do to the minute because I knew every mile of that road, you get 41 minutes sitting on that shoulder. Not 4 hours, 41 minutes. The hour meter on the unit read 4,113 and 5/10. That is 5 hours and 11 minutes. I sat in the scale lot at Alliance with my little pencil, and I did that arithmetic 4 times. Then I got down, and I dipped the unit's fuel tank, which is a thing you can do with a stick, and the unit had burned within a hair of exactly what 5 hours of running takes out of it. I knew that number the way you know your own phone number, because I had been buying that fuel for 19 years. And the load was perfect. That is the thing I would tell you if I could only tell you one. When they broke the seal in Sioux Falls that ice cream was dead on temperature, top to bottom, front to back, and the man on the dock signed for it without a word. I never reported it. There was nothing to report. Nothing was wrong with the truck. Nothing was wrong with the load, and I was not hurt, and neither was anybody else. What was I going to say? That a meter and a watch had a disagreement in Nebraska. I still write the hour meter down at every stop. I have not driven a truck since '94, and I still do it, in my head, at a gas pump, which my daughter thinks is very funny. And I have kept every logbook I ever filled out, and about once a year I go into that footlocker and I get out October of '83, and I look at those two numbers, and I have never once been able to make them into one number. It was late. I had been driving since Denver. I was 44 years old and tired, and a man can misread a meter in the dark. Maybe I wrote a digit down wrong at Kimball and carried it all the way through, and I've been sitting on a pencil mistake for 40 years. But then again, maybe not. The tide ran a full flood inside 50 minutes, and the sky never moved off where it was. Linwood, Pinkham. I was 26. This was September of 1968, out on the bay, 3 miles off, and I was hauling alone in a 32-foot boat my grandfather had built, and my father had ruined, and I had put back together. Wood. She worked when she rowed, and you could hear every seam of her talking, and I like that, because a wooden boat tells you things. Her name was the IDA-M, and my mother painted it on the transom, and she was not a sign painter, and you could tell. My buoy colors were white and green with a red spindle, and they were my grandfather's colors, and everybody in that harbor could tell you whose they were from a quarter mile off. I say that so you understand it was not a hobby. I have to tell you about the ledge, or none of this is worth listening to. There is a ledge out there, and my family has fished it since before there were engines. It is bare at half tide. At 3/4 flood it is covered to the top of the beacon. I have never owned a tide book in my life, and I never will. I do not need one. I can lie in bed with the window open and tell you what the water is doing by the sound it makes on that ledge, and if that sounds like a lot, I would say to you that a man who has done one thing since he was 9 years old had better be good at something. My father used to make me call it. He would run us out in the dark and he would say, "What have we got?" And I would have to say it out loud before I was allowed to look. Half and making. 3/4 and slack. If I was wrong, he did not say anything, which was worse, and I got, so I was not wrong. That is the whole point of what I'm about to tell you. Everything else you can take or leave. It was a little before 5 in the morning. Fog. Not thick fog, the thinning kind, where it is going to burn off but has not decided yet. So you get 200 yards and a gray light with no sun in it. Flat water with a long, low swell running under. Cold enough to see my breath. The marine set was on the shelf in the house and there was nobody talking on it, because nobody was out yet. Sonny Gaffney does not start hauling until 6 and never has. The gulls were the first of it. There are always gulls on a hauling boat. Always. You cut bait and they are on you before the bag is open, and they scream, and it is a nuisance, and you would miss it terribly if it stopped. There were none on me, and I could see them. There was a raft of them sitting on the water off my starboard quarter, maybe 200 yards, 40 or 50 birds, and they were all faced the same way, and not one of them lifted. I hauled 2 more traps. I want to be honest about that. I did not stop and stare. It was a working morning, and I had 100 traps in the water, and gulls do queer things. The hauler whines when it takes a strain, and then it settles, and there is a rhythm to a string that gets into you. Warp and block and whine, and the trap coming up green out of the water with the weeds streaming off it. You do that 11 times before you have really woken up. I was in the middle of that, and I did not want to leave it. Then the engine changed, She had an old 6 in her then, and I knew that engines note the way you know a person's cough. It dropped a little. Not a miss, not a stumble. Just went down a step and stayed there. I looked at the tachometer and the needle was on 1100, and it did not move the whole time. I put my hand flat on the box and she felt the same as she always felt. I had a bait bag half open in my hand, and I stood there with it. Then the water went off. I do not know how else to say it. Calm comes on slow. You watch it come across in a sheet and there is a lag in it. The ripples go and then the little ones go and there is always something still moving somewhere. This did not do any of that. It was ripple and then it was nothing. All at once, out to the fog on every side, like somebody had set the whole thing down on a table. That is when I noticed I could not hear the ledge. I have heard that sound every working day of my life since I was 9 years old. Water on rock. It is not loud. You do not think about it any more than you think about your own kitchen clock. It was not there, and the ledge was right where the ledge always is, off my bow, 130 feet, close enough to hit with a bait bag. So I looked at it. And it was covered, right up over the top of the beacon, and the water coming off it was running the wrong way, running up over it and off the near side toward me, which water does not do there, has never done there, and I have watched that ledge in every state of weather there is. Then the gulls all lifted at once and came screaming down on me for the bait. I want to tell you what that felt like. I said something to myself that I will not repeat, and I laughed out loud, an ugly little laugh, and I got my hands going again, and the engine came back up onto her note in the middle of it. And I thought, well, there you are, fog, and no sleep, and a young fool 3 miles out talking to himself. And then I noticed my hands were stiff. Not cold stiff. There is a difference. Cold stiff is the first hour. This was the stiff you get about 10 in the morning when you have hauled 100 traps, that ache down in the meat of the thumb. And it was 5 o'clock, and I had hauled 11. I had the warp in my hand at the hauler. And everything stopped. I am not going to be able to give you this properly. Nothing came, nothing touched me, nobody spoke to me. It was that I understood, all at once and very calmly, that I was being looked at from above, the way you look at something in a jar. Not the way you look at a man. There was no meanness in it, and there was nothing wanted from me at all. It was interest. Somebody was seeing what I was. And I was not frightened. I have said that to 2 people in my life, and neither of them believed me. And I do not blame them, but I was not. I could not open my hand on that warp. I want to be clear that I was not held. I could have. I did not. That is a different thing, and I've had a long time to think about which one it was. Then I was sitting on the washboard with my back against the house. I do not have anything for the middle of that. I have looked for it for 50-some years, the way you go over a room for a dropped thing. There is nothing there. It is not black, and it is not blank. It is that there is no place in me where that piece is kept. My watch said 12 minutes of 6. The clock in the house said 12 minutes of 6, and that clock ran fast about a minute a week, and I had set it Sunday, and it was right where it should have been. So there is 50 minutes gone since I threw off, near enough. And the sky was exactly the same. I want you to have that. Same gray, same fog in the same place. Sun still not up over the point, and I know to the week where the sun comes up over that point in September. Every clock I had, and the sky itself all agreed that it was still 5 o'clock in the morning, and I had lost 50 minutes at the most. The tide was at full flood. That is 7 hours of water. The ledge was under. The beacon was standing in it to the second band, which I had seen 1,000 times, and always at a certain hour of a certain day, and never at 5 in the morning with the sun not up. I sat there and watched it for a while. I did not do anything. I did not start hauling. After some time, and I could not tell you how much, and that is not a dodge. I honestly did not look. It began to go back down. The ordinary way, the way it does, at the ordinary speed. And it went down, and the ledge came out, and everything about it was completely normal. The water over that rock goes a particular green when the sun gets on it, and I sat there and watched it come up green like it does, and I remember thinking, well, there is the green, so we are all right. I ran in about 8. The harbor was at half ebb, exactly where the day said it should be. The whole town was having an ordinary Tuesday. Sonny was coming out as I was going in, and he lifted a hand at me, and I lifted one back. 2 things I found. The first is the bait. I had a bag of salted redfish that came out of the freezer at 4 that morning in 1 block, frozen so hard I had knocked it on the rail to break it. When I went to clean up, she was thawed the whole way through and warm to the hand and starting to go. That is a long day in the sun. That is not 50 minutes on a cold, foggy morning in September, and I am not somebody who is careless with bait. I have handled a good deal of bait. I know exactly what a bag does in a warm hold on a hot August afternoon, and how many hours it takes to get where that one was, and I would say 7 or 8, and I would not be far off. The second thing is that underneath it, down in the bottom of the barrel, there was 1 lump of ice about the size of my fist, and it had not melted at all. I did not tell anybody, not that day and not since, not aboard a boat, not in a kitchen, not to my father while he was alive, and not to my own son, who fishes that ledge now with a plotter and a computer, and does not need to hear anything about it from me. I fished another 41 years off that same rock. Never had another thing happen, not one. There was a gull with a bad foot that I knew by sight for 11 years, and I fed her, and she was in that raft that morning, faced the same way as the rest of them, and she was on my rail 3 days later, screaming for herring, like nothing had ever happened to either one of us. I do not know why. That is the part that sits with me. It is, though. I still read the ledge before I read my watch, every morning of my life. I did it this morning, and I have not owned a boat in 9 years. It was fog, and I was young, and a man alone in the fog gets himself turned around. That is what I would tell you if you were somebody else. But then again, maybe not. I opened the doors on a firebox with a full white fire in it, and that fire was not making any sound. My name is Orville Sandstrom, and I fired steam. My father fired steam, and his brother ran a hostler's job in the same roundhouse, so I came to it the way a farm boy comes to a tractor. This was February of 1949, on a night freight, over a division out in western Montana that I will not name because there are 3 men still living who would know exactly which night I mean, and I do not want to put it on them. If you have never been on the deck of a steam locomotive, I need to give you a minute of it. It is 20 below outside. Inside it is 110 where I stand, and my back is cold and my front is cooking, and that is normal. There is a boiler between me and the engineer that is about the size of a grain bin lying down, so you cannot talk to him. You lean out and look, and he leans out and looks. The noise is not a noise, it is a weather. The head brakeman was asleep on my seat box with his cap over his eyes because that is what head brakemen do. Wily. He could sleep through a knuckle letting go. There is frost on the inside of the cab glass in a ring the shape of where your breath goes, and you scrape it with a thumbnail to see out, and you do that every few minutes all night and you stop noticing you are doing it. The whole cab smells of hot valve oil off the tallow pot and coal gas and wet wool. When you go through a cut, the smoke comes back over the tender and finds you, and there is nothing to be done about it. And the fire is the whole of your life. A fireman fires ahead. You do not fire for the hill you are on, you fire for the hill you are coming to 20 minutes out, and you build a bed and you keep it even, and you keep the door shut as much as you can. I could tell you how much coal was left in that tender by the way the shovel rang on the deck when I set it down. That is not a brag. Every fireman worth keeping could do it. And I read the water glass by habit every couple of minutes, the way you check a mirror, because a fireman who stops reading the glass is a fireman who is going to have a very bad night and possibly a short one. You work the injector too, and an injector is a temperamental item that shrieks at you when it picks up, and you learn its moods like you learn a person's. There is a lot of a fireman's job that is listening. You listen for the fire. You listen for the injector. You listen for a hot bearing back in the train, which every railroader listens for forever, including now, including in a car on a highway. I am telling you all that so that when I say the fire was wrong, you understand that I am not somebody guessing. We had taken coal at a chute. I built her up good there because there was a grade coming. I marked the time on the watch in my bib pocket, which was my father's watch and gained about 4 seconds a week. And I marked it because I always marked it, and that is the only reason I have anything to say to you at all. Ed had a habit of tapping the whistle cord twice for nothing at all, just 2 little taps that did not make a sound whenever he was thinking. I could see his hand do it out of the corner of my eye about every 5th mile for 31 years. I want that in here because it is the kind of thing you only know about a man you have stood 4 feet from, in the dark, for a third of your life without ever once having a conversation. Then the stack talk went even. An engine says 4 beats to a revolution. Chuff, 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 chuff. That is what she is. You could not make her do anything else if you tried. It is how the machine is built. The beats got closer together and evener, and then they were not beats. They were one sound, held, like a note somebody was leaning on. And it stayed that way, and we did not slow down and we did not speed up. I looked out my side. The snow had stopped going past the window. It had been coming across in those long, low sheets you get out there, and now the flakes were hanging at the glass, not falling slow. Hanging. And I watched one of them turn over, all the way over, slow, and show me both its sides and stop. I looked forward past the boiler, and there was a light lying along the snow up the right-of-way, steady, no flicker to it, and it was throwing my shadow up the front of the tender behind me. I turned around to look at my own shadow standing up there on that coal, and there was nothing above the train. I want to say that plain. I put my head out into 20 below air at 40 miles an hour, and I looked up, which is a foolish thing to do and which cost me a face full of cinders, and there was sky, and there were stars in the sky, and there was nothing between us and them. And the light was still lying on the snow. I went to the gangway and put my head out the back and looked along the train. There was no smoke. There was no steam standing over the stack. In 20 below air, a locomotive makes a column you can see for 4 miles, and there was not one thing over us but sky. I came back in and I put the shovel into the tender. It went a foot too far. I do not know what else to tell you about that. The coal was where the coal was. I could see it. The scoop went into it and kept going about a foot past where it should have stopped, and then it took hold, and it came out full, and I threw it in, and I did it again, and it did it again. Ed Trumbo was over there on his side with his hand on the brake stand looking straight up the track. He did not turn. I am not saying he was stiff or that he was strange or that anything had got him. He was running a train the way he ran a train for 31 years. I looked at him for a long time. He never turned his head. Then the 4 beats came back. Just like that, out of the middle of it. Chuff, 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 chuff. And the snow started going past the window, and the light went off the snowbank the way a light goes off when a car turns, and Ed leaned out his side for a signal like a man does. I laughed. Out loud on the deck, where nobody could hear me. And I swung the doors and put in a round, and I was fine. And I was thinking about how I was going to not tell anybody about this. And my arms told me I had put in a great many more rounds than I remembered putting in. That is a specific thing. Any man who has swung a scoop knows it. There's a place in the shoulder that goes, and it goes on a schedule, and it does not care what you think. My shoulders were at the end of a district. Then I opened the doors to look at the fire, and the fire was silent. You have to understand what a firebox sounds like. It roars. It is the loudest thing in a loud place. I had the butterfly doors open, and there was a full white fire in there, working, alive, and it was not making one sound. I could hear my own blood. I stood there with the scoop in my hands, and I did not move, and I have no idea for how long. And neither does anybody else, because Ed never turned around, and the brakeman never woke up. There was a lunch pail on the shelf with a jar of buttermilk in the corner of it that my wife put up for me. And when I got to it after, hours later, by everything the railroad thinks happened, it was warm through. It sat on a shelf on the fireman's side of a locomotive, so I have never been able to make anything of that. I am giving it to you anyway. And then I was firing again, and the noise was back, and we came around the curve above the yard. Here is what I had. That fire was 22 minutes old by the timetable and by my father's watch. 22 minutes. What was in that firebox was a bank of clinker across the whole grate, edge to edge, of the kind you get at the end of a division when you have been fighting bad coal all night. I had to work it. I had to break it up with the bar, and it took me the rest of the run. The ash pan was packed full, and I could lay my bare hand on the outside of it, on the outside of a pan under a fire that was at working heat. I did that twice because I did not believe it the first time. The water glass had us 4 hours down in the tank, and the coal in that tender had gone back to the bulkhead. That is a division and a half of coal, on a stretch of railroad that takes 22 minutes, and I had been standing on that deck the whole time. We came in on the advertised. That is the part that finishes it for me. The register at the operator's window had us on time. Mr. Bear had his green eye shade on and his book open, and he wrote us in and never looked up. The conductor's wheel report had us on time. Ed Trumbo signed off and went home, and I saw him 100 times after that, and he never once mentioned anything to me, and I never asked him. And I have thought about why I never asked him more than I have thought about the rest of it put together. I took water and coal at the terminal, and the man at the coal dock asked me what in the world I had been doing, and I said the coal was bad, and he said, "It is all bad," and that was the end of it. I went and sat in the beanery, and I did not eat anything. I had a cup of coffee, and I turned my father's watch over in my hand and looked at the back of it, which was worn smooth where his thumb had been, and I did the arithmetic on that fire 8 or 9 times, and every time I did it the answer came out the same, and the answer was not possible. And then I went and slept 11 hours in a bunk room with 4 other men snoring, which I have always taken as a sign that whatever it was, it did not follow me home. I fired 3 more years, and then the diesels came for all of us, and I ran a yard job until I retired. I have been retired longer than I worked, which is a strange arithmetic to sit down with. I still cannot look into a fire without listening to it. A fireplace, a burn barrel, a grill in a yard on the 4th of July. My grandchildren have caught me at it. I say I am checking the draft. It was 20 below, and I was 27 years old, and there is a glare off an open firebox that will make a man see any number of things. I have said that to myself for a long time, but then again, maybe not. A bed of pinheads the size of a match head went 8 days over inside 40 minutes, and the bed lying beside it, cased the same hour by the same crew, did not move at all. My name is Genoveva Aguiar. Everybody has called me Jenny since I was 6. I was 43 when this happened, and I had been running mushroom houses for 19 years, and my father grew them before me. And if you want to know what my whole life smells like, it is composted straw and wet peat. This was November of 1986 on a farm in the valley, about 1 in the morning. Let me tell you what a growing house is, because people picture a barn, and it is not a barn. It is a long, windowless room. Concrete floor, sealed, and a door at each end with a rubber gasket that sighs when you break it. Aluminium racks with beds stacked 6 high, so you are walking in an aisle with growing crop above your head and below your knees on both sides of you. We held it at 58 degrees and about 90% humidity on purpose, because that is what the crop wants. There is no light in there at all. The casing is peat, and it takes a thumbprint and holds it. And there were nights I walked a whole house and did not touch a thing. And other nights when I put my thumb in every bed like a woman testing bread. None. Whatever your headlamp is doing is the only thing happening. A headlamp turns a room like that into a tunnel with you standing at the end of it. You get, so you steer by the racks. And you are dressed for it. Rubber boots, and you step through a disinfectant bath at the door going in and coming out. Every house, every time, because one bad spore on a boot can cost a company a month. I had a picking knife on a lanyard around my neck that I did not need at night and wore anyway, and a basket hooked on the rack at the end of the aisle where I always hooked it. And it breathes. The air handlers cycle. They thump on, and they sigh off all night. And after 19 years, that sound is more familiar to me than my own husband's breathing, and Manny would tell you the same and not be offended. The other thing you need is the flush. Mushrooms come in flushes, and you can set a calendar by them. Pinhead to picking size is about 4 days. 4 days, every time, for 19 years. So I would walk the beds at night with a lamp on my head, looking at pin sets, carrying the count in my head, because the count is what tells the foreman how many pickers to bring at 4 o'clock. That is all I was doing that night. It was the most ordinary thing in my working life. I had the little radio going in the anteroom, which only ever got the one station out of town, and I could hear it through the door as a kind of mumble whenever the gasket let go. Out the far end of the row, the composting yard was steaming under its lights the way it does on a cold night, and if you've never seen that, it looks like a small city burning very politely. I will say one more thing about myself, and then I will get to it. I could walk into a house with my lamp switched off and tell you what day of the flush it was from the smell. That is not a party trick. It is 19 years. And it is the reason I noticed anything, because I noticed the smell before I noticed anything else. The fans went first. They stopped cycling. They went to one note, continuous even, and it took me a few seconds to understand what was bothering me about it, which is that there was no fan in it. A fan has a fan in it. There is a blade going around, and you can hear the blade whether you know it or not. This was a note with nothing turning inside it. Then the smell. The house smelled like rain on a hot road. I want to be very careful here. That is a real smell, and everybody knows it, and it is one of the best smells there is. It has no business being in a sealed windowless room in November, in a valley that had not seen rain since April, in a building whose entire air supply comes through a filter bank I inspected myself. I stood in the aisle and I breathed it in twice, deliberately, because I did not believe it. And I did the thing you do, which is, I looked for a reason. I thought about the filter bank. I thought about a door standing open at the far end, which would have been a firing offense, and which would also not smell like that. I thought about a truck idling outside. There is always a reason, and my whole job is finding it, and I did not find one. Then my lamp stopped. The beam went out to the 6th bed and ended, not faded. Ended at the upright, the way a beam ends on a wall. And the 7th bed was not dark. I could see it perfectly well. I could see the casing and the frame and the drip line. It was lit by nothing that I could find in a color I still do not have a word for, and I've had 40 years to look for one. It was not white and it was not blue. If I had to say, I would say it was the color that the inside of your eyelid is when you are lying in the sun, and that is not right either. Then I saw the flies. There are cyrid flies in every mushroom house on this earth. Every one. You fight them your whole career and you never win. Every fly in that house was down on the casing, sitting, not flying. All of them faced the same way, and they were faced toward the far end, and there was no draft. I had been standing in that aisle for I do not know how long, and there was no air moving on the back of my neck, and the fans were running. You feel it in a house. You feel it every second you are in there. There was nothing. Then the fans thumped back on. The air came and hit me, and I said thank you out loud in Portuguese, which is a thing I say, and then I laughed at myself for saying it to a fan, and I started walking down toward the far house to do my other check, and I felt fine, and I felt a little foolish, and I want you to know that I was completely all right for about 10 steps. Then I noticed my hands were cold. That house was at 58 degrees. It had been at 58 degrees all night. I had been at 58 degrees all night. My hands were cold the way your hands get cold outdoors. So I stopped in the middle of the aisle, and I did what I do every single night, which is I switched my lamp off. You do that to look for the glow of a bad bed. A bacterial patch will sometimes show if your eyes are clean, and I have done it 10,000 times. And standing there in the black between those racks, I understood that I was inside something's attention. I need to say what that was and what it was not. It was not a presence. Nobody was in there with me. Nothing was breathing and nothing was near me, and nothing at any point came close enough that I could have touched it. It was attention, and it was patient, and there was no appetite in it whatsoever. It was the way I look at a tray of seedlings on a Sunday to see how they are coming along. I did not move, there was nothing to see. I have been asked what I was afraid of, and the honest answer is that I was not afraid at all. I was embarrassed, the way you are when you realize somebody has been watching you work. I want to say one more thing about it, and then leave it alone. It did not feel like being hunted, and it did not feel like being visited. It felt like being counted, like being one of the things in the house that somebody was keeping track of, along with the beds and the flies and the fans, and no more interesting than any of them. And then it was over, and I turned my lamp back on. The far bed had gone over. It was full open cap, veils broken, every one. The gills had gone brown. The whole bed had dropped its spore, and the caps were beginning to turn up at the edge, which is going over, which is a bed you do not pick, which is a bed you have lost. That is 8 days of a crop. It is 9 if you want to argue with me, and I would take 9. I had counted that bed at midnight, and it was pinheads the size of a match head. The bed, lying next to it, on the same rack, cased in the same hour of the same day by the same crew, out of the same load of peat, had not moved. Pinheads. Exactly where I left them. There was a spore print on the aluminium of the frame and on the concrete under it. Brown-purple, laid down heavy, the way it goes when caps have been open and dropping for days. I put my thumb in it. It came away brown. I still cannot tell you why I did that instead of any other thing a person might do. The caps were cold. I put the back of my hand against one, and it was cool the way a mushroom is always cool. And I do not know what I expected, and I have been ashamed of expecting anything ever since. My watch said 40 minutes had gone. The clock on the wall in the anteroom said 40 minutes had gone. And the crew bus came through the gate at 4 o'clock exactly. And Kuko came in complaining about the fog on the river road the way he complained about it every morning of his life. And for the whole rest of the world it had been 40 minutes. We picked around that bed. I told the foreman it was a spawn run problem, and I wrote it up as a spawn run problem, and the company took the loss, and nobody ever asked me a second question about it. That is farming. Things fail and you write them up. What I did not write up, because there is no line on a form for it, is that I went back into that house at 7 in the morning with the lights of the world on, and the crew working 2 aisles over, and I stood in the same spot and put my lamp off again, to see. And it was a room, that is all it was. It was 58 degrees, and it smelled like peat, and there was a draft on my neck, and somewhere behind me a picker was singing along to Kuko's radio, badly. I stood there long enough to be sure, and then I went and did my paperwork. I did not tell my brother Tino, who was on the day crew for 11 years. When I did tell him, he laughed at me for about 10 minutes, and then he stopped laughing and he asked me one question, which was whether the flies were still faced that way when the lamp came back on. And I said no. And he said, well, and he never brought it up again. I have worked at 3 farms across 2 counties since then, and at every single one of them I check the far bed first. Before the office, before my coffee, before anything. My crews think it is superstition and I let them think it. A house can surprise you. A spawn run is a strange thing and nobody understands it completely. Not the researchers, not anybody. And things happen in the dark in a growing room that nobody has ever written down. But then again, maybe not. There were 58 degrees of star trail on a plate I exposed for 31 minutes. My name is Wilma Nordhagen. I was 52, and I had been a night assistant at a small university observatory on a ridge in the southern part of the state for 11 years. This was November of 1987. No moon. The dry cold you get at 6,000 feet, which is a cold that does not blow, it just sits on you. I should explain what a night assistant does because people assume I was an astronomer and I was not. The astronomer decides what to look at and then goes to bed. I run the telescope, I find the field, I set the guiding, I open the shutter, I close the shutter, I change the plates, I write everything down, and in the morning I hand somebody a box of glass and a logbook, and they say, "Thank you, Wilma," and I go and sleep until 2 in the afternoon. I loved that job. I want that on the record before I say anything strange. It is a quiet trade. The observing chair runs on rails, and you shove it around with your foot. There is one red bulb going, and after 20 minutes your eyes are so open that a wristwatch dial is an insult. Down the ridge, the coyotes go at about 9, and then they are done for the night. Halfway down the road there is a cattle guard that rings when the wind gets under it. And on a windy night you hear it every couple of minutes, and you stop hearing it. And on a still night the absence of it is the loudest thing on that mountain. Now, the arithmetic. Because the arithmetic is the whole thing. The sky turns. It goes around once a day, which comes out to 15 degrees an hour. If you point a camera at the sky and leave the shutter open and do not move the camera, the stars draw lines, and the length of the line tells you exactly how long the shutter was open. 15 degrees an hour. It is one of the very few measurements in this world you cannot argue with. A trail is a clock that draws itself. A telescope has a drive that turns it against the sky at exactly that rate, so the stars stay as points. And on top of that I sat at a guider with a crosshair and made little corrections all night with a paddle, which is the most tedious, beautiful work there is. 4 hours of it, and your eye goes strange, and you learn to look a little to the side of the crosshair rather than at it, and you make a correction every 30 or 40 seconds with your thumb, and you could not stop doing it if the building fell down around you. Fallers smoked, and she would leave one burning on the edge of the desk in the hut, and I used to think about that cigarette when I was up there alone. It is not a good habit, but it is a human being nearby. That night I was doing 30-minute guided exposures on a field for Dr. Faller, who was asleep in the hut 100 yards down the ridge, and was not to be woken except for weather. Reuben, the caretaker, comes up Tuesdays. It was not Tuesday. The road down is 9 miles of switchback, and I have never in my life driven it in the dark. I had a mechanical timer, a stopwatch, and a logbook with ruled columns and a pencil on a string, and I wrote the open time and the close time on every single plate for 11 years. The drive went first. There is a worm gear in that drive, and it has a sound. You know it the way you know your own refrigerator, which is to say you do not know it at all until it changes. It changed. It went to a hum with no gear anywhere in it. Nothing turning, just a note. I put my hand on the tube, nothing to feel. A drive that is stopped tells on itself within a minute, because the field walks. Stars drift out of the crosshair and you chase them, and then you swear and get out from under and go look at the motor. The field did not walk. It sat exactly where it was, and there was no gear in the sound. And both of those things cannot be true at the same time, and I sat there with my thumb on the paddle for a long time doing nothing. Then the stars stopped twinkling. All of them. At once. Now, I know how that sounds, so let me say it as a technical matter. Scintillation is the atmosphere. It is air moving between you and a star. Every star in the sky twinkles a little, all the time, everywhere on this planet. And if you look at a field through a 36-inch reflector, you see it constantly, and you spend your career cursing it. There was none. The field was as steady as a photograph. A sky with no scintillation in it is not a sky. It is a picture of one. Then the dome shutter motor ran. I heard it. It is a groan, and then a rattle in the track, and I have heard it 10,000 times. I had not touched the paddle. My hands were in my lap, and the slit did not move 1 foot in either direction, for the whole time the motor was running. And through that slit there was a patch of sky with no stars in it. It had an edge on it. That is what I keep. There were stars all the way around the edge, ordinary stars, sitting there not twinkling, and inside the edge there was nothing at all, and it did not move. I watched it, and I am a person who is professionally patient about watching things not move, and I gave it a long time, and a cloud at that altitude would have traveled the width of my hand. I did the other check too. I looked away from it and looked back, twice, because your eye will build you almost anything if you stare, and it was there both times with the same edge in the same place, and the same stars sitting outside it. I also want to tell you that there was no dew. On that ridge in November, everything is wet by 2 in the morning. The rails are wet. The chair is wet. The back of your own hand is wet and cold. Everything that night was bone dry, including the dome floor, and I remember putting my palm flat on the rail to check because I thought I might be losing my mind in a specific and testable way. Then the drive picked its worm note back up, and the stars started twinkling, and the whole sky went back to being an ordinary rotten November sky, and I said out loud, well, all right then, to an empty dome. I have never done that before or since, and I got up to change the plate, and my fingers would not do the dark slide. That is a 3 hours in the cold thing. It is a very particular clumsiness that I knew extremely well, because I got it every single night at about 4 in the morning, and it was 20 past midnight and I had come up warm from the hut at 11. I stood on the observing floor with the plate holder in both hands, and the mountain had the quality of a held breath. I understood, and I want to say this without any hysteria in it at all, because there was none, and I have been very careful about that for 40 years. I understood that whatever I could not see was aware of me specifically. Not of the observatory, not of the telescope, of me. And it had been for a while, and it was not going to do anything about it. I did not put my hand on the rail. I have thought about why not. I think it was manners, which is an absurd thing to say about the most unusual minute of my life. It was somebody else's telescope and somebody else's mountain, and something was working, and I did not want to be in the way of it. Then it was ordinary again, and I finished the exposure and closed the shutter at 31 minutes on my timer and wrote 31 minutes in the column and went on and did 2 more plates and drove nothing anywhere, because I do not drive that road at night. I developed that plate at 5:30 in the morning, in the darkroom, in the red light, with the hypo smelling the way hypo smells. Every star on it was a line. I measured them with a scale on a light box. 58 degrees, near enough as makes no difference. That is 3 hours and 52 minutes of open shutter. And here is what stops it being a broken drive, or a stuck shutter, or a tired woman. Every trail on that plate was exactly the same length and exactly the same direction. If the drive had been slipping, you get a mess. You get points and then a jog, and then points again, and you can read the whole sorry story off the glass. This was clean. It was as if the drive had simply been switched off and the shutter left open in a perfectly steady building for 4 hours, inside a 31-minute exposure that I timed with a mechanical timer and a stopwatch and wrote down twice. There was other evidence, and I will give it to you quickly. There was rime on the inside lip of the dome slit, layered, formed, melted, formed again, which is 2 nights of cycling, and it had not been there at 11. The dew heater on the finder had drawn its battery flat, and that battery ran about 4 hours, and I had put a fresh one in at the start of the night because I always did. And Dr. Fowler ran a chart recorder in the hut for cloud, which was not my instrument and which I did not touch, and it showed one unbroken, clear line across the entire night, which agrees with my clock and disagrees with my plate. At dawn, I walked down to the hut with the box of glass, and Fowler was already up and annoyed with me about a completely different plate, one from Tuesday, where I had missed a field by a whisker. I said I was sorry. I put the box on the table. I did not say one word about the trails, and I never did, not to her, not to Reuben, not to anybody at that institution. I put that plate in my bag. It is the only thing I ever took from that mountain, and I am not proud of it, and I have it still. I have shown it to exactly 2 people. The first was a man I was seeing at the time, who looked at it for a while and asked what I wanted him to say, and that was more or less the end of that. The second was a graduate student in about 94 who did not know what he was looking at, and told me, very kindly and very slowly, that my drive had been off, and I said yes, and he said it happens to everybody, and I said yes it does, and I put it back in the box, and I made him a cup of tea, and I have not shown it to anybody since. I know what an unguided plate looks like. I know what a slipped drive looks like. I know what a light leak looks like, and I know what a plate looks like when the holder has been put in crooked, because I have made every one of those mistakes, and I made most of them in my first year, and I have the glass to prove it. I stayed another 9 years, and then the plates went away and everything went to chips, and I retired, and I have a kitchen table now with a good lamp on it. I still measure trail lengths on old plates with a plastic ruler. For no reason, I do not do calculations. I lay the ruler down and I read the number off, and I put the plate back in the box. Plates get fogged. Timers fail, mechanical ones especially, and they fail in ways that make no sense. People make mistakes at 4 in the morning on a cold mountain, and I was 52 years old, and I had been up since noon. But then again, maybe not. My hands came up out of 38 minutes wrinkled the way hands come up out of hours. Arden Kirley. I was 39 years old in the fall of 1964, and I'd made something better than 700 dives by then. Commercial, salvage mostly, and pipework, and a lot of very boring inspection that paid the same as the interesting kind. This was on the lake, off the Michigan shore, over a deck barge that had gone down in 90 feet with a load on her, and we were 3 weeks into getting her ready to lift. I dove a Mark V. Copper helmet, canvas suit, lead boots, a hose, a lifeline, and a telephone wire, all of it made up into one umbilical that a man on deck holds in his hands the whole time you are down. That man is your tender. Mine was Halsey Dubbin, and he had tended me for 6 years, and I would have gone anywhere with him. A tender feels you through that umbilical. He knows when you have stood up. He knows when you have knelt down. He knows when you are working and when you are resting, and he knows before you do when you are in trouble. Halsey whistled 2 bars of the same song, always the same 2 bars, and always stopped for 6 years, and I never once asked him what it was. The thing about this trade that people do not understand is that it is not about seeing. You cannot see. That day I had maybe 6 feet of visibility, brown-green, going to nothing above me and nothing below me, and the bottom was silt like flour that came up around you if you breathed on it wrong. The trade is about time. Inside a helmet it smells of brass and rubber and yourself. The air off a dirty filter has a taste, a sort of flat, oily taste on the back of the tongue, and you learn to ignore it. On deck, the breastplate crushes you, and you walk like a man carrying a stove. In the water, it weighs nothing, and you are graceful for the only time in your life. Time is the whole job. You get a bottom time. Halsey ran a stopwatch on deck and called it down the wire every 5 minutes. 35, 30. And the low-pressure compressor that was pushing my air had an hour meter on it, because it was rented and it billed by the hour, and I read that meter myself with my own eyes before every single dive. I want to be plain about why. A man who trusts somebody else's arithmetic about his own air has already decided how he wants it to end. That is not a slogan, that is just true, and I have known 2 men it was true about. 411 6/10. That is what the meter said when I went over the ladder that morning. There were 11 rungs on that ladder, and I counted them going down like I always did. I wrote that number on the back of my hand in grease pencil, which was a habit, and which is also why I have never had to wonder about it since. Flat calm, September. Low sun. Halsey was bored and said so. I got down to the barge and got to work on a shackle, which is what I was there for, and I was maybe 15 minutes into it when the telephone went funny. Halsey's voice went to a tone, an even tone with no words anywhere in it. That happens with a bad connection and you knock the helmet with your knuckles and shout, and usually it comes back. Then his 5-minute call came through perfectly. 30 minutes, Artie, clear as a bell. And then it came again, about a second later. The same call, the same words, and the same breath in the same place in the middle of it. That is what I keep. A man breathes in the middle of a sentence and he does not breathe in the same place twice. I said, "Say again," and there was nothing. Then the light went out. Not to dark. Dark. I have been in plenty, and dark is restful. It went to a flat gray with no direction in it at all, so that I could not tell you which way was up. In that situation, you find up by your bubbles, which is the first thing anybody teaches you, and I stopped and looked at my bubbles. They were going sideways. I want to say something about panic here because this is where a diver panics, and that is how divers die. I did not panic. I have thought about that a great deal, and I do not think it was courage. There is a thing that happens where the part of you that would be frightened is simply not being used. I have only felt it that one time. It is not calm. Calm has some effort in it. This was more like being set down on a shelf. I think whatever was going on out there did not leave room for it. I put my hand down and moved the silt. You always stir silt. You cannot help it. It comes up in a cloud around your knees and hangs for a minute, and then it drifts off with whatever current there is and settles back down, and you work in a fog of your own making all day long. That cloud did not do anything. It held the exact shape I stirred it into. It had edges. It had the little curl in it that my glove had put there, and I put my hand back through it, slowly, and the shape stayed, and my glove went through it the way a hand goes through smoke in a photograph. Then the compressor stopped. You hear a compressor through the hose. It is a chug, and it is the sound your life makes, and every diver on surface supply hears it in his sleep for the rest of his life. It stopped, and my air kept coming, steady, at the same pressure, sweet as you like, and I stood on that bottom and breathed it. I also want to mention that I was not cold. 90 feet of that lake in September finds the seams of a suit inside 10 minutes and starts on your wrists. I was not cold anywhere at all. Then Halsey came back in the middle of a sentence. He was complaining about the shackle and about Cap Meacham, who billed everybody twice for everything, and who had said something at breakfast. Ordinary, aggrieved. Halsey had a way of complaining that was really a kind of contentment. I have never in my life been so glad to hear a man complain about a shackle. I answered him. I heard my own voice come out level, which surprised me. And then I noticed that I could not properly feel the lifeline through my glove, and I thought, without any alarm at all, well, my hands have gone. I was kneeling on the bottom with the shackle in my right hand, and there was no up and there was no sound. I understood that something was looking at me. I am going to put it the only way I have ever been able to put it. It was the way a man looks into an aquarium. Interest, and nothing intended by it whatsoever. I was a thing in water being observed by something that was not in the water and was not going to get in the water, and there was no more feeling in it than that. I did not let go of the shackle. That is the only thing I did. Nothing came near me. I want to be very clear because people always want there to be more. Nothing touched me, nothing was seen, nothing spoke. I knelt on the bottom of that lake holding a piece of hardware. I could hear one other thing, and I have never made anything of it. Somebody dropped a wrench on the steel deck of that barge 90 feet above me, and through the water it came down as one flat knock, the way it always does, and it was the only sound in the world. Then Halsey said, coming up on 38, and I said, on my way, and I went up the way you go up. On deck, they got the breastplate off me and the gloves, and my hands were wrinkled white to the second knuckle and past it right down into the palm. That is hours in water. That is a bath you fell asleep in. That is not 38 minutes in a dry canvas suit with a rubber cuff. And I had a cut on the web of my right thumb from opening a paint can that morning, which had still been weeping at breakfast, which Halsey had made a remark about. It was closed, it was scabbed over, and the scab had already lifted at one edge. Halsey's stopwatch read 38 minutes and 10 seconds. The deck log said 38. Meacham's own bell log said 38, and Meacham had no reason on earth to be generous with anybody's time, since he was billing for it. The compressor hour meter read 415 and 8/10, 4 hours and 2/10. I stood there in a wet suit with a copper collar on my shoulders, and I did that subtraction 3 times. Then I went and dipped the day tank on that compressor, and it was down about 4 hours of gasoline, which I could tell you within a quart, because I had been filling that tank myself every morning for 3 weeks. It was flat calm the whole time. Nobody on that deck saw one thing. Halsey had been bored and had eaten my sandwich off the rail and told me so. There was a gull that had been working that barge for 3 weeks and would take bread off your knee, and it was not on the barge when I came up, and it was back the next morning, and I have no idea whether that means anything at all, and I am not going to pretend it does. I did not report it. There was nothing to report. Nobody was hurt, no equipment was lost, and the shackle got made up, and we lifted her in October. I did do one thing. I went and looked at that hour meter about 9 times over the next 2 days, at odd hours, the way you go and check a stove you've already checked. It ran on normally. It counted the hours we ran it and stopped when we stopped it, and it agreed with the fuel, and it agreed with the invoice at the end of the month, which Meacham disputed on principle and lost. The only 4 hours that meter ever counted that nobody could account for were mine. I dove another 22 years after that. Never had anything else. Not one strange minute in 22 years. I told my wife about it in 1971, in a kitchen, sitting down, and she listened all the way through without saying anything, which is one of the reasons I married her. And when I was done, she asked me the only question anybody has ever asked me that I could not answer. She asked what I had been doing for 4 hours. I said I had been holding a shackle. She said for 4 hours. And I said no, for 38 minutes. And then I sat there and thought about it. And I have been thinking about it since. Because those are the two things, and they are both true, and there is no third thing that makes them one thing. I have never gone over the side since without a stopwatch strapped where I could read it myself. Not because I stopped trusting Halsey. Halsey is dead now, and he was the best man I ever worked with. I just wanted a number in front of my own eyes. Hands wrinkle, meters stick. Rental equipment lies about its hours, and rental equipment always has. And any man who has ever hired a compressor will tell you the same. But then again, maybe not. There were 40 hours of ash on the shoulders of those pots, and I had fired that kiln for 9. I am Lois Brannock. I was 47. I have a groundhog kiln built into a hillside in the western part of the state, and in October of 1994, I had fired it 41 times, which is not a great many, but it is enough that a kiln and a woman have an understanding. This was the 3rd night of a 5-day firing. Leaves down and wet on the path. The firemouth throwing orange out onto the clay pad every 4 minutes when I opened it, and the rest of the time a slot of light and a roar. I have to explain cones or nothing after this will land. A parametric cone is a little wedge of clay you put on a shelf inside the kiln where you can see it through a spy hole, and it bends when it has had enough. That is the important part, and it is the part people get wrong. A cone is not a thermometer. A cone measures heat work, which is temperature and time together. You can get a cone down slow and cool or fast and hot, and it does not care which, because what a cone is telling you is not how hot you are. It is telling you how long you have been hot. I have always found that a little bit unsettling, and I found it unsettling before that night, and I have said so in workshops for 30 years and gotten a laugh out of it. I had a pack at the front where the fire goes in, and a pack at the back where it comes out, and I read them through the spy holes with a piece of welder's glass on a string. Tildy fires with me, and Tildy went down to the house at midnight, and she was not to be woken before 4, and that was our arrangement for 6 years. The neighbors are a ridge over, and the nearest of them is a summer place that is empty in October. There is a creek below the pad, and you cannot hear it when the kiln is working. So it was me and the kiln, and 3 ricks of split oak and a coffee pot on a hot plate in the shed. There is a smell to a wood firing that gets into everything you own and does not come out. Hot brick, mostly, which is a mineral smell, and green oak and the ash. My clothes from that week are still in a bag in the studio, and if you open it, it is 1994 in that room in about 2 seconds. My dog is named Peanut, and Peanut will not come up that hill after dark and never would, from a puppy, before any of this, and I am not going to make anything of it because dogs are dogs. My glove has the thumb burned through. Same glove. I have never replaced it. I stoke every 4 minutes. I count my stokes out loud. My teacher counted his out loud, and I have never questioned it in my life. You get into a rhythm on the 3rd night that is not quite being awake. 4 minutes is not long enough to sit down, and it is too long to stand there. So you do a small thing between stokes. You move a shelf, you check a wad, you drink half a cup of coffee that has gone cold in the time it took you to pour it. And you talk. Everybody who fires alone talks. Ask any of us. At about 12 o'clock, she stopped pulling. That is the first thing. A wood kiln pulls. There is a draft through her, and the flame licks out of the fire mouth when you open it and lays over, and there's a rhythm to it you could set a watch by. It stopped, and the flame stood straight out of that mouth and did not move, like something painted on the air. I have got a photograph in my head of it that is more like a photograph than a memory. I closed that door and opened it again, which was not a smart thing to do and cost me heat, and it was doing the same thing when I opened it the second time. Then the roar went down. Not out. Down to the note she makes at about 1,000 degrees, which is a note I know because I hear it every firing on the way up. And I looked at the barometer and the needle was sitting on 2,200, where it had been sitting all evening, and it did not move. I put the welder's glass on the front spy. The color inside had gone past orange to a color I do not have a word for. I have tried. I have asked painters. I have looked at charts. It is not on any chart. And the pots in there were throwing their shadows toward the back of the kiln, away from the fire, which I have looked at from every angle since and cannot make work. Then I stood back, and the ash was going up. There is always fine ash coming out of the fire mouth and settling on the pad, and it drifts and it lies down, and by the end of a firing you are ankle deep in it. That ash was going up, slowly and straight, on no wind at all, and it stopped at about the height of my head, and it stayed there, in a layer, the color of a moth. I could have put my hand into it. I did not put my hand into it. I have gone back and forth for 30 years on whether I should have. There's a version of me that put a hand up into that layer and knows something, and I do not think she is better off, but I think about her. I also want to say there was no shimmer over the chimney. There is a column of heat shimmer over that chimney for 5 days out of every firing, and you can see it against the sky, and there was nothing over it, and she was at temperature. Then she took a breath and roared back. That is exactly what it felt like, and that is what I have always said. She took a breath. The flame started licking, and the draft came back, and I got 3 splits in fast because a kiln that has coasted needs feeding, and I said, all right, out loud to a kiln, and then I looked at my watch and it said 20-1. My arms said different. My arms said I had been standing at that fire mouth stoking for a good deal longer than 40 minutes, and arms do not lie about that. You know exactly how long you've been throwing wood. And then it went quiet, and I was standing there with a split of oak in my hand. The fire was silent. The heat was steady and even on my face. And I knew, flatly, the way you know the weather has changed, that I was being looked at from directly above. Not at the kiln, at me, and at what I was doing, with the sort of attention a person gives a process that is running, to see how far along it is. I stood there holding that wood. I did not put it in, and I did not put it down. Then I was stoking again, and Tildy came up at 4 with the thermos and asked how she was doing. I said she was doing fine. That is what I said. I had been standing at that fire mouth for 4 hours by every part of my body that keeps time, and I said she was doing fine. And I drank the coffee, and I let Tildy take the next 2 hours the way we always did. Here is what I found, and here is what I have got. The front pack read cone 8 down and cone 9 going soft. That is exactly right. That is precisely where a kiln 9 hours into that stretch ought to be. And if you had asked me to guess before I looked, I would have said cone 8 down and 9 soft. The backpack, which I had read 40 minutes earlier by my watch and by Tildy's tally sheet on the shed wall with the 4-minute marks going down it in pencil, was flat. Flat on the shelf, through Cone 13. Cone 13 out of that kiln is something like 40 more hours of stoking. I have never had Cone 13 out of her in my life, and I do not believe she will do it. I took that pack out afterward and I kept it. It is on a shelf over my wheel, and it has been there since '94. 3 cones lying flat over their little wad of clay, like something that is given up. And people pick it up in the studio and say, "Ooh, what happened here?" And I say, "A long firing." I stoked her out the rest of the way and we cooled her 4 days, and I unbricked on the Sunday. The pots in the back had ash on them. Running. Dripping. Pooled down at the foot where it had run off the shoulder and puddled on the wadding and stuck them to the shelf, so I had to chisel 2 of them. That is what you get off a 100-hour firing, and people drive across 3 states for it and pay accordingly. My firing was 91 hours in total from lighting to shutting, and I know exactly where in it that ash landed, because I fired that kiln and I know what came out of her the other 40 times. My 3 ricks were gone. All 3, I had stacked them Wednesday. I counted them twice and then I got Tildy to count them, without telling her why, which was not fair to her. She counted 3 ricks gone and said we had burned hard on the 3rd night, which we had, and I said yes we had, and that was the closest I ever came to telling her. And the ash at the back of that firebox was cold to my hand, while the front of it was at working heat, and I do not know what to do with that one either. I sold those pots. I want to be honest about that because people ask. I thought about not selling them. I sat with them on the grass outside the kiln for most of a morning, and I thought about taking a hammer to the lot, which is a thing potters do more often than anybody outside the trade would believe, and then I did not, because they were the best work that has ever come out of that kiln, and it was not their fault. I sold them at a show in Asheville, and I did not say a word about any of it, and a woman bought the big jar and told me it was the best ash she had ever seen on a local pot, and I said thank you. I still count my stokes out loud. Every firing alone, and my students think it is charming, and one of them put it in an article, and I have never explained it to a single one of them. Cones lie sometimes. They get contaminated, or they get set crooked in the wad, or somebody hands you a box that is mislabeled. And 41 firings is not so many that a woman knows everything there is to know about a hole in a hillside. But then again, maybe not. I stood flat-footed on a slab of concrete that had come out of the truck 43 minutes earlier. Dwayne Ostergaard. I was 30. 6 seasons on state work by then, Western Kansas, July of 1972. We were pouring nights that summer to beat the heat, which sounds sensible until you have done it, and then it just sounds like a way to be tired in a different order. I finished concrete. That is the job. The paver lays it and screeds it, and the finishers come behind and make it into a road, and on a tie-in where the machine cannot reach, somebody does it by hand. And that summer that somebody was mostly me. You work off knee boards, which are 2 squares of plywood, and you move like a swimmer, board and knee and board and knee, and you are never once standing up. You drag burlap. You run a tine rake across it at the end to give it teeth so a car will hold the road in the rain. And a slab talks under a boot. A green one is dull. An old one rings. There's everything in between, and after a couple of seasons, you hear it without listening for it. I need to tell you about set, because everything I have to say is about set. Concrete sets on a clock. You have got a window. From when it comes out of the truck, you have got a couple of hours. Less in the heat, more if they have doped it. And inside that window you can work it. After that, you cannot. It is not that it gets hard all at once. It goes from cream to butter to something that will take a mark, but not close, and then it will not take a mark at all, and if you have got it wrong at that point, you do not fix it. You saw it out and you pour it again on Thursday, and the state watches you do it. Every load comes with a batch ticket. It has got the plant on it and the mix and the yardage and a time stamped on it by a machine at the plant when the truck was loaded, and another when it discharged. I kept mine in my shirt pocket, and I ran the clock in my head off that stamp all night long. That is not diligence. That is self-preservation. The water truck came around every so often, and the man driving it never said anything to anybody all summer, and I never learned his name, and I have felt bad about that for 50 years. I could also call a slab's age by putting my thumb on it, within about 15 minutes, and I was right often enough that the foreman used to walk me down the line to settle arguments. Farrell Lipsy. He would say, "Ostergaard, what have we got?" And I would put my thumb on it and say an hour and a half, and he would look at the ticket and say, "Huh?" I was proud of that. I was 30 years old, and I was proud of my hands the way a kid is proud of a car. And I would like to be able to tell you I was a thoughtful man that summer, and I was not. I was a good finisher, and I knew it, and that was about the whole of what was going on in my head. That is what I had going for me. That is all of it. That night, I was a quarter-mile back from the paver on a hand-finished tie-in, by myself, which is how you want it. The crew was all up ahead behind the machine, and that machine makes a noise you cannot talk over at 50 feet. There were 4 work lights on stands around me, throwing hard white light and hard black shadows. 80 degrees at 2 in the morning, and not one breath of air moving anywhere in the state of Kansas. Crickets. Wet cement and diesel and hot dust. The light went first. The lights did not dim. I want to be clear about that because that is what everybody wants it to be. The bulbs were fine. It was that the light stopped reaching. There was a line across that slab, straight maybe 20 feet out from me, and past the line the light was not going. And past the line the slab was not dark. I could see the tine marks on it. I could see the edge form, lit by nothing. I stood up off my knees. I walked out to the line, too. That is the part I do not tell people, because it makes me sound like a fool. I walked out to where the light stopped, and I put my hand across it, and my hand went across, and there was nothing to feel. It was just that, on one side, there was light coming off a bulb, and on the other side, there was a lit road with no bulb doing it. Then the bleed water quit going down. Bleed water comes up on a fresh slab in a sheet, and it lies there, and it goes off, and you wait for it, because if you close a slab with the water still on it, you have ruined it, and everybody will know by winter. That sheet stood up in a fine, even texture all over, like the head of a drum with somebody playing it from underneath, and it held that way, and it did not go anywhere. Then I noticed the paver. It was in the same place. The noise of it, I mean. Same volume, same direction, holding, and it should not have been. That machine walks away from you at about 4 feet a minute, and you hear it go. You measure your night by it getting quieter. It stayed exactly where it was for a long time, and there was nothing in the lights. I want to give that its due. In July out there, a work light is a weather system. You get so you finish with your mouth shut. You get bugs in your coffee and bugs down your shirt, and you stop caring by the middle of June. 4 bare bulbs on stands in July in Kansas. There should have been a blizzard in them. Moths and June bugs and those little green things that get down your collar. There was not one thing flying in any of them. Then I ran the float, and it did not leave a mark. That is when I got up and walked. A bull float leaves a mark. That is what it is for. I ran it out and back, and the surface closed behind it like water closes, no ridge, no line, nothing. And I ran it again, and the same thing happened. Then the paver started walking away up the grade. You could hear it go, and I cussed it, cheerfully, the way you cuss a machine at 2 in the morning, and I got down on the boards and got my float moving, and I felt fine. And my forearms told me I had been finishing all night. There is a specific ache that comes in the meat below the elbow, At about the 6th hour, and I knew that ache the way you know a song. I had it. At 2 in the morning, 40 minutes into a tie-in. And then everything got very quiet, and I was standing out in the middle of that slab with the float handle in both hands. I was being watched from above. I know how that sounds. I am going to say it the way it was, which is that it was not frightening and it was not personal. It was the attention a man gives a slab when he is checking it for level. Somebody was looking down the length of me to see whether I was true. There was no want in it. That is the closest I can get. When a person looks at you, there is always a little bit of wanting in it, even if it is only wanting you to move. There was none of that. I was being measured by something that was not going to do anything about the result. I did not look up. I have been asked about that more than anything else by the 2 people I have ever told, and I do not have an answer. I did not look up. I stood there with a float in my hands looking at concrete, and I did not raise my head, and I could have, and I did not. Then it was ordinary again. Crickets, piver up the grade, bugs in the lights, and that slab had set. I stood on it, flat-footed, both boots, out in the middle of the panel, and I did not sink and I did not mark it. I did not mean to. I stepped off the boards the way you would step onto a floor, because my body had decided something my head had not caught up to yet, and I was standing on it before I understood what I had done. I got down and put my thumb on it and left nothing at all. Not a dent, nothing. I took the ticket out of my shirt pocket, machine stamped 151. My watch said 2:34. Farrell's watch said 2:34 when I walked up the grade and asked him, and I did not tell him why I was asking. The clock in the pickup said 2:34, 43 minutes, and I was standing on a 4-hour slab. By daylight, the whole panel had crazed. Hairline map cracking. Corner to corner. The pattern you get when a slab dries out over hours in a wind. There had been no wind. There had been no wind for 9 days, and everybody on that job had been complaining about it. The state inspector wrote it up as a batch problem. That is what it looked like, and that is the thing that happens. We busted it out Thursday and reported it, and I signed the sheet. I want to be clear that nobody suspected me of anything, and nobody was out any money to speak of. A busted panel on a state job is a Thursday. The plant ate it. There was a form, and I signed the form, and the form has a box on it for cause, and somebody else's handwriting is in that box. I have thought about that box a good deal. There is no line on any form anywhere for what actually happened, and if there were, no man is going to write in it, because you have to work the next day. Farrell asked me twice what happened out there. Once that morning and once about 3 weeks later, out of nowhere, over a tailgate. And both times I said the mix came in hot, and both times he looked at me for a second longer than he needed to. My brother Marlin was on the paver that night, 400 yards up the grade, and he did not see one thing, and he said so for 30 years, and he said it in a way that got less certain as he got older. He never saw anything. I want that in there. It is only me. I have poured a lot of concrete since 1972. I have got a company now and other people's names on trucks. I still put my thumb on fresh concrete before I do anything else on a job. Before I look at the ticket, before I talk to anybody, before I get out of the truck properly. My people think it is a superstition and I let them think it, and it is not a superstition. It is that I want to know what time it is. It was July, and it was hot, and mixes do funny things in July, and a batch plant is a machine and a stamp is a machine, and machines are wrong every day of the week, but then again, maybe not. I filled that lamp to the shoulder at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and at 9:20 that night the font was dry. My name is Novella Scarda. I am 98 years old. I was 15 when this happened, in October of 1943, on our place out in the James River country. Harvest was done. That is the feeling I want you to have first, because it is a good feeling, and it was a good evening. Everything was in. The days had gone short. My father had driven over to a sale in the next county and was not coming back until morning, and my mother had gone to bed early with a cough she had all that fall. We had no telephone. It was 2 miles to the Kubik place. The nearest light after dark was ours. People do not know what that is like now, and I do not blame them. When the lamp is out, it is out. There is no glow anywhere on the horizon. You cannot see your own hand, and you are not frightened of it, because it is simply the way the evening is, and you go to bed early because there is nothing else to do. And I have never slept as well since as I slept in that house. I kept the lamps. That was mine, the way the separator was mine, which I hated, and the chickens were my brother's before he went. Every afternoon at 4, I filled the kitchen lamp, and I trimmed the wick on Saturdays, and I polished the chimney with a piece of newspaper, which squeaks, and which is a sound I would know if I heard it tomorrow. Kerosene gets on your fingers, and it does not come off with soap. It comes off with time. I went to school on a Monday smelling of it for 9 years, and so did every other girl in that room, and none of us thought anything of it at all. There was a windmill out past the barn, and on a still night it did not turn, and the sound of a windmill not turning is one of the quietest sounds there is. You learn a lamp. You learn how much it takes. I filled that font to the shoulder, not to the top, because my mother said a full font weeps, and a font filled to the shoulder is about 11 hours. I want to say that plainly, because it is the only thing in this story I am sure about. 11 hours. I had been filling that lamp since I was 9. I was sitting at the table with the lamp on it. I do not remember what I was doing. Reading the catalog, probably. And the kitchen went quiet. I had washed the separator, which took 40 minutes and which I hated with my whole heart, and I had put the discs on the rack, and I had banked the range. That is what an evening was. I noticed it, and I did not mind it. That is the part I have never been able to make anybody understand. It was a nice quiet. The clock on the shelf kept ticking, and I remember the ticking because everything else stopped seeming to matter, and the ticking went on being the only thing that did. Then I took the pail and went out to the pump. The yard was lit. It was lit evenly, from no direction I could find, the color of the inside of a lampshade when the lamp is on. I could see the shelter belt, all of it, every box elder. I could see the barn and the corner of the granary. I could see my own 2 hands in front of me, both sides, and the grass was not moving anywhere. There was no wind that night, so that does not sound like much, but there is always something. Grass has a little bit of a shift in it, even when the air is dead, and there was none, anywhere, in the whole yard, in every direction I looked. I hung the pail on the hook, and I understood that something was looking at me. I want to say this the way it was, and I am 98, so nobody can do much to me for it. It was the way you look at a lamp you are about to fill. That is exactly it. Not the way you look at a person, and not the way you look at an animal. The way you look at a lamp when you are going to pick it up, and you glance at it first to see how it is doing. It was not unkind, I need that in. And I was not afraid. I have said that to a good many people over a good many years, and I have never once been believed, and I have stopped minding. I was 15 years old, standing in a lit yard at night in the middle of nowhere, and I was not afraid. I stood there with my hand on the pail. Then I was carrying the pail into the house, and it was full, and I do not remember pumping it. The lamp had gone out. I set the pail down on the bench, and I picked the lamp up, and it was light in my hand. And I took the burner off and looked in, and the font was dry. There was that smell of a lamp that has gone out by itself, which is different from one you have blown out, and there was nothing in it. I tipped it. I want you to know I tipped it, because a girl who has filled a lamp every day for 6 years is going to tip it before she believes anything. and there was not a sound in it and not a weight in it. The clock on the shelf said 9:20. I filled it at 4. That is 11 hours of oil, and there had been 5 and a bit. I did not wake my mother. I do not know why not, or maybe I do. She was tired that fall and she coughed, and a girl gets very good at not being a nuisance. The range was still warm. Mika was asleep on the step, and she did not lift her head when I came back in, and Mika lifted her head at everything. I filled the lamp again, and I lit it, and I sat up with it a while, and nothing else happened, that night or ever. I sat up until about 11. I remember being very calm and very interested. I was not going over it, and I was not frightened of the window. I sat with my hands around a cup, and I watched the flame the way you watch a flame, and at some point I went up to bed, and I slept the whole night through. In the morning, I took the burner off to fill it properly, and the wick was charred. Not the ordinary way. It was down to a hard black crust the whole way across, the way a wick gets after a week of long evenings, and it wanted trimming badly, and I had trimmed that wick on the Saturday, that is the whole of it. Nobody was hurt. Nothing was taken. The cattle were fine, and the dog was fine, and my mother slept through, and my father came home the next day with a hay rake he had paid too much for. I did not tell him. I did not tell her. I did not tell Mrs. Kubik, who I loved, and who would have listened. I married in 1948, and I told my husband in about 1960, and he said, "Well, that is something." And he was a kind man, and that is what he had. I told one of my daughters once, in a car, in about 1984, and she was quiet for a mile, and then she asked whether I had been unhappy that year, which was a fair question and a loving one. I said no, I was 15, and it was a good fall, and the crop was in, and she let it go, and she has never brought it up, and I do not think she believes there was a lamp at all. She thinks there was a girl on a farm with nobody to talk to. Maybe there was. I have had that thought myself, and I have given it a fair hearing. I am 98. I live in an apartment now with electric light in every room of it, and a girl who comes on Tuesdays. And I have a lamp on the shelf. It is not that lamp. That lamp went in a sale in 1966 with everything else. It is a lamp I bought at a church rummage in about 1980 for $1.25. Every October I fill it. I do not light it, I have never lit it. I fill the font to the shoulder, the way my mother said, and I put the burner back on, and I set it on the shelf, and I leave it there for the year. I could not tell you why. I have thought about it, and I've had a good deal of time. My hands do it. That is the closest I can get. Somewhere in October my hands go and get the can, and they do it, and I stand there while they do, and I am not certain anymore. That is the honest end of it. I do not know whether a girl of 15 filled that font as full as she remembers filling it. I do not know whether I have been telling myself a thing for 83 years until it wore a groove, which is what people do, and I have watched other people do it and been sorry for them. I was not afraid. I keep saying that, and I know it does not help. And then again, maybe not.